They took everything from me. My sight, my hands, my family. Warlord Jew forced me to watch as he slaughtered my wife and son for his sick theater. Now I lurk in his palace shadows, crafting puppets from the bodies of his men, each death bringing me closer to the night of his grand opera. The gentle scholar died in those flames. What emerged is vengeance incarnate. I felt the moment when Warlord Jew realized who I was. The sightless gaze from my scarred eye sockets, somehow fixed upon him with unnerving precision as screams filled his grand opera house. Not the theatrical cries he so enjoyed, but genuine terror as nobles and generals recognized. The performers weren't constructs of wood and cloth, but corpses, manipulated by mechanisms I had spent years perfecting. Blood dripped from their joints as they enacted a familiar scene, my family's murder, my destruction. Jew rose from his ornate chair, recognition dawning on his bloated face. His mouth opened but no sound emerged as the doors sealed shut with a heavy thud. "Do you recognize this scene, Warlord?" My voice carried through the now silent theater, years of hatred distilled into each syllable. "You directed it 5 years ago when you slaughtered my family." His guards rushed forward. They collapsed mid-stride, strings erupting from their flesh. I smiled, feeling the familiar tug against my mangled fingers as I controlled them like the puppets they now were. "I was once Master Wei," I told him, "a scholar who believed in peace and poetry. You should have killed me completely." Looking back, I should have seen his cruelty coming. The rumors had reached our village for months before his arrival. Tales of his theater of horrors where humans served as living puppets. I dismissed them as exaggerations. Scholars often mistake knowledge for protection. 5 years earlier, I sat in my garden reciting poetry with my son while my wife played the guqin nearby. Her music filled our modest home with beauty I took for granted. Our village existed in fragile peace, a small paradise I believed my learning could somehow protect. When Jew's forces arrived, I hid my family in the storage cellar beneath our floor. I thought myself clever. I didn't know then that Elder Lao had already revealed our location to spare his own children. "This woman's beauty and this child's grace will make excellent additions to my collection," Jew announced as his soldiers dragged them into sunlight. He examined them like merchandise while I fought against the hands restraining me. But first, a demonstration of my artistry. I remember every detail. The makeshift stage erected in our village square. The methodical way his men bound my wife and son. The anticipation on Jew's face as he personally selected his instruments. "Watch closely, scholar," he told me, his breath hot against my face. "You appreciate art? I create it from flesh." The memory burns brighter than the irons that took my sight. My wife's screams as they dismembered her slowly, keeping her conscious through foreign medicines. My son's pleas as they transformed him into a living prop. The village forced to watch, to learn the cost of resistance. I didn't know it then, but Jew had specifically targeted my family. This was no random act of conquest. When nothing remained of them but blood and fragments, Jew approached me again. His silk robes were pristine despite the carnage surrounding him. "Such exquisite grief," he whispered, studying my tears like a connoisseur. "Your sorrow will be my masterpiece." He ordered my eyes seared with hot irons. I still recall the sizzle of my own flesh, the world vanishing into eternal darkness. Then my hands, the instruments of my scholarship, crushed and twisted until bones protruded through skin. "You'll be my living prop," he said as I screamed, a backdrop of perfect suffering for future performances. As consciousness faded, I felt him remove something from around my wife's neck. A locket containing a lock of her hair, a keepsake I'd later discover in his private collection. For months, perhaps a year, I existed only in pain and grief. The dungeon became my world, marked by the rhythms of guards' footsteps and distant screams. Occasionally dragged out to serve as a decorative element in Jew's productions, I became familiar with the theater's acoustics, the palace layout, the patterns of his court. My blindness, meant to cripple me, instead sharpened my other senses. I could identify individuals by their breathing patterns, memorize conversations from across rooms, map the architecture through echoes. I had thought myself broken beyond repair until the night a guard visited my cell, drunk and boastful. "You should have heard your son's final words," he slurred, describing details only someone who had participated would know. "And your wife?" The warlord kept her alive much longer than necessary, for private entertainment. Something crystallized inside me, a cold clarity I had never known, as a scholar. With movements born from hatred rather than training, I lured him close and snapped his neck with my deformed hands. As his body fell, I made my first discovery. I could still create, not with brush and ink, but with death and bone. Instead of calling for help, I dragged his corpse to the darkest corner of my cell. With methodical patience, I examined it with my fingertips, learning anatomy through touch. Sinews, tendons, joints, all potential strings for my newfound artistry. "If Ju wants puppets," I whispered to the darkness, "I will become the master puppeteer." The guard's bones became my first tools, sharpened against stone and hidden in the filth of my cell. When the next jailer came investigating his companion's disappearance, I was ready. His death taught me more about the vulnerabilities of the human form. Night after night, my collection grew. Each kill refined my technique. The guards' disappearances created a superstitious fear among their replacements. They spoke of curses and ghosts, never suspecting the blind prisoner who sat motionless in his cell, seemingly broken. I am not proud of what I became, but neither do I regret it. The gentle scholar died in that village square alongside his family. What emerged from the darkness was something new, a creature forged in flame and grief, dedicated to a single purpose. I didn't realize then that vengeance would require years of patience, but as I fashioned my first crude puppet from a guard's remains, manipulating the corpse's limbs with strings of tendon and gut, I felt something beyond pain for the first time since my blinding. The shadow of a cold smile crossed my ruined face. Warlord Ju had created his own destruction. He taught me that art could be made from suffering. Now I would show him just how well I had learned his lesson. The guards avoided my cell. Rumors spread of a curse upon those who approached the blind prisoner. 6 had vanished without trace. I encouraged their superstitions with whispers they could barely hear, words that seemed to come from nowhere. Fear became my first weapon. My blindness revealed secrets light would have hidden. Echoes mapped the dungeon's architecture. Water seeping through stone exposed forgotten passages. During the guards' increasingly rare inspections, I sat motionless, a broken shell hiding a mind consumed with meticulous planning. I remember the day I discovered the first passage. My sensitive fingers found an irregularity in the mortar. Centuries of moisture had weakened it. For weeks I worked silently, extracting one stone each night and replacing it before dawn. The tunnel beyond smelled of ancient dust and possibility. I had been a scholar of poetry. Now I studied anatomy through touch, learning which tendons controlled which movements, how joints could be locked and released with subtle pressure. My cell became a workshop of grotesque experiments. My crude bone tools grew more sophisticated. Looking back, my first real puppet was a masterpiece of desperation. I reconstructed a guard's body with sharpened bone supports, gut-string tendons, and a control mechanism built from scraps of metal stolen during my rare appearances at Ju's performances. The corpse jerked unnaturally when manipulated, but it moved. I practiced in darkness until my fingers remembered what my eyes could no longer see. I learned to control multiple strings with minimal movement. The puppeteer must remain invisible, allowing the audience to focus on the performance. This lesson would serve me well. Through the hidden passage, I discovered the underbelly of Ju's palace. Ancient tunnels connected the dungeon to the theater, the kitchens, even Ju's private chambers. The builders of this place had ensured multiple escape routes for a paranoid predecessor. Their foresight became my opportunity. I established a workshop in an abandoned storeroom, where the screams of my new subjects couldn't be heard. Each night I expanded my territory, mapping the palace through sound and touch. I learned the routines of guards, the habits of servants, the schedule of Ju's grotesque performances. My hatred was no longer hot rage but cold purpose, each step planned toward a singular goal. The blind prisoner was forgotten, presumed dead in his cell. The phantom moving through the palace walls was something new, something patient. I didn't realize then how completely I had transformed. The scholar who once flinched at the death of insects now harvested humans with mechanical precision. Their bodies became my materials, their knowledge my intelligence network, their deaths stepping stones toward Ju's destruction. During one exploration, I found a chamber that reeked of strange preservatives. My fingers discovered glass jars, containing objects suspended in liquid. Their shapes felt familiar. Too familiar. Hair floating like seaweed. Small fingers preserved in perfect detail. Ju's collection. Trophies from his victims. Among them, I found the locket he had taken from my wife's neck. Inside, the lock of her hair remained. I clutched it against my chest and allowed myself one moment of raw grief before returning to cold calculation. This would be part of his undoing. In the same room, I discovered Ju's private journals. I couldn't read them, but I took them to a servant I'd captured, a young man who recorded Ju's correspondence. Before ending his life, I made him read every word, revealing secrets I never anticipated. Ju had been a traditional puppet master once, performing for imperial courts. His mediocrity earned him mockery. Humiliation transformed him. If he couldn't create beauty that moved audiences, he would create horror that paralyzed them. His human puppetry was born from artistic failure. I remember laughing in that moment, a sound that terrified my captive more than my earlier threats. The symmetry was perfect. The failed puppet master would fall to a reluctant one, forced into artistry by suffering. My knowledge of the palace grew along with my collection of puppets, each more sophisticated than the last. I developed methods to preserve the freshness of my materials, techniques to create joints that moved more naturally, ways to make the dead appear alive through carefully placed mechanisms. I had been imprisoned for nearly 3 years when I created my most ambitious puppet, not a guard this time, but Ju's advisor, Minister Chen. I studied him for weeks, learning his mannerisms, his speech patterns, the subtle movements that comprised his identity. His disappearance caused brief concern. His reappearance with an explanation of family illness quelled suspicions. No one noticed the small scars at his joints, the slightly stiff gait, the occasional delay in his responses. I didn't know then how completely I had fused with my creation. Hiding in spaces above chambers, I controlled Chen through an intricate system of strings and levers. When he spoke, it was my voice perfectly mimicking his tones. When he moved, my fingers danced. In the darkness above, Chen attended Ju's council meetings, delivered reports, advised on matters of state, all while I listened, gathered intelligence, and positioned my next targets. My puppet performed so convincingly that Ju confided in him, revealing vulnerabilities I eagerly cataloged. The palace began to change as my influence spread. Key figures disappeared, replaced by my creations. Some puppets were fresh, controlled directly. Others preserved through specialized techniques I developed, animated by mechanical devices of my design, all extensions of my will. I remember Ju's growing paranoia. He sensed something amiss but couldn't identify the threat. He executed random servants, performed divination rituals to identify curses, increased guards who unknowingly reported to my puppets. His fear was intoxicating. The scholar I had been would have pitied him. The creature I had become savored each drop of his mounting terror. Through Minister Chen, I learned of Ju's planned celebration, a grand opera commemorating 10 years of his reign, with rival warlords and imperial envoys invited to attend. The performance would showcase his most elaborate human puppetry yet. Dozens of captives prepared for their roles. I couldn't have designed a better opportunity. The entire power structure that enabled his atrocities gathered in one place. The venue he had used to display his cruelty transformed into the instrument of his downfall. Poetic justice that even my former self would appreciate. As preparations, began, I accelerated my plans. More key figures vanished, replaced by my creations. I modified the theater itself, installing hidden mechanisms throughout. Every prop, costume, and set piece concealed some element of my design. The stage became an elaborate trap. Looking back, I'm still amazed at what blindness taught me. My hands developed sensitivity that sight would have hindered. I could detect the slightest resistance in a mechanism, the smallest imperfection in a joint. My ears distinguished the movements of 20 puppets simultaneously, allowing complex choreography no seeing puppet master could manage. The night before the grand performance, I eliminated and replaced the entire cast with my most sophisticated puppets. Some constructed from fresh victims, others assembled from multiple bodies, all designed to appear completely lifelike until the moment of revelation. When Ju inspected the final rehearsal, he stood mere feet from me as I hid within the walls. He praised the performance, unaware that he applauded his own destruction, unaware that the figures bowing before him were all extensions of my will. I didn't feel triumph yet, only cold anticipation. The monster he created had evolved beyond his imagination. Tomorrow he would finally understand the full extent of his failure. Tomorrow he would learn what true artistry of suffering meant. I positioned myself behind the great curtain hours. Before the guests arrived, the theater hummed with potential energy. Every mechanism tested, every puppet in place. My fingers twitched with anticipation, rehearsing the complex sequence of movements that would transform this celebration into a reckoning. Dignitaries arrived in waves, rival warlords with forced smiles and concealed weapons, imperial envoys maintaining the pretense that Ju's authority was sanctioned, nobles and merchants who profited from his cruelty, all unwittingly taking their assigned seats in my elaborate trap. I remember the moment Ju entered, the fanfare, the bowing sycophants, the practiced magnanimity as he acknowledged the audience. He wore ceremonial robes embroidered with scenes from his greatest performances. His special chair waited center front, modified by my hands the previous night. He had no idea he sat upon the instrument of his captivity. Looking back, I should have felt some hesitation, some echo of the scholar who valued mercy. Instead, I felt only the calm certainty of an artist before his masterpiece is revealed. The performance began conventionally enough. Actors who appeared human performed traditional scenes from Chinese opera. The audience relaxed into familiar entertainment. My puppets moved with perfect mimicry of life, their mechanisms invisible, their dead eyes animated by careful craft. I controlled everything from my hidden position, fingers dancing across control bars, feet working pedals that triggered mechanisms throughout the theater. The coordinated movements of 20 puppets simultaneously would have been impossible for a seeing puppet master. My blindness had become my greatest strength. The first hint of unease spread through the audience when the performance shifted tone. The traditional scenes gave way to tableaus from Ju's conquests, villages burning, captives begging. My puppets enacted these scenes with unsettling realism. Ju leaned forward, confusion evident in his posture. This wasn't the program he had approved, yet the technical brilliance kept him from interrupting. His artistic vanity outweighed his caution, exactly as I had anticipated. I didn't know then that he had already recognized something familiar in the performance, something that tickled his memory and raised the first prickle of fear along his spine. The crucial transition came an hour into the performance. My puppets began enacting specific atrocities I had learned about during my captivity, the massacre of the Liu family, their daughter forced to dance in her parents' blood, the slow execution of General Fang, who had dared criticize Ju's tactics. The audience grew visibly uncomfortable. These were not metaphors, but explicit recreations of events many had witnessed, events they had chosen to forget. Now they were forced to confront their complicity. Ju stood abruptly, finally realizing the performance had slipped beyond his control. Before he could speak, I activated the mechanism in his chair. Hidden clamps seized his ankles. Thin wires emerged to wrap around his wrists. He was immobilized, yet still able to see everything that followed. The theater doors sealed with an ominous thud. My puppets stationed throughout the audience revealed their true nature, mechanical joints exposing themselves as they seized key figures. Warlords found themselves restrained by the animated corpses of enemies they thought long dead. I emerged from behind the curtain, the scarred ruin of my face visible to all, my milky, sightless eyes somehow finding Ju with unnerving precision. "The performance has only just begun," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner. "Tonight's feature presentation, The Tragedy of the Scholar's Family." I remember the electric silence that followed, the dawning recognition on Ju's face, the moment he realized who stood before him. The main curtain rose to reveal my masterpiece, a recreation of the village square where my family died. Every detail perfect from touch memory, the makeshift stage, the instruments of torture, and at the center, puppets crafted to resemble my wife and son in immaculate detail. I had preserved certain materials all these years for this very purpose: their hair, fragments of their belongings, items that carried their essence. Ju struggled against his restraints. "Wei," he hissed. "They said you died in the dungeon." "I did," I replied simply. "What stands before you is your creation." The puppets began to move, enacting the exact sequence of my family's destruction. Each cut, each scream, each plea for mercy reproduced with horrific precision. I spared the audience nothing. They would witness what they had enabled through their alliance with this monster. Some tried to flee. They found my mechanisms waiting. Spikes descended from the ceiling. Trapdoors opened beneath seats. The theater transformed into an extension of my vengeance. Not all would die, but all would suffer according to their complicity. I approached Ju slowly, savoring his mounting terror. "You recognized me not just as a victim," I said, my voice carrying clearly despite the chaos, "but as the poet whose works you envied. I've read your journals. You coveted my talent, my family, my peace. Everything you could never create yourself." His composure shattered completely. "I'll give you anything," he begged. "Power, wealth, your freedom." I circled his chair, allowing him to track my movements, to anticipate what came next. "I want nothing from you," I told him, "except your final performance." Looking back, what followed tested even my resolve. I had prepared specialized tools for this moment, implements designed to transform Ju while keeping him conscious. I worked methodically, inserting mechanisms into his joints, threading strings through his flesh, removing sections of his skull to access his nervous system directly. His screams became music, his blood the paint for my canvas. Throughout it all, I narrated for the audience exactly what I was doing and why. A scholarly lecture on the art of human puppetry, delivered by its most reluctant master. The key innovation, I explained while inserting a control rod along Ju's spine, is maintaining consciousness while removing autonomy. The subject must experience everything while controlling nothing. The remaining audience watched in horrified fascination. Some vomited. Others wept. None could look away from the spectacle of the torturer becoming the tortured. When my work was complete, Ju remained fully aware but utterly under my control. His eyes alone remained his own, windows to the horror of his consciousness, as his body responded to my manipulation. I remember testing the mechanism with simple movements. His arms raised jerkily, his legs shuffled forward. His mouth opened and closed at my command, emitting sounds I permitted. No longer the warlord, merely the puppet. "Stand," I commanded, and his body obeyed while his eyes screamed silently. "Bow to your audience." As Ju's body bent in mechanical obeisance, I activated the final phase. Hidden reservoirs of oil released throughout the theater. Flames erupted along the walls, not close enough to immediately threaten, but sufficient to create panic. "Those who merely watched suffering will escape with the memory of fear," I announced. "Those who participated will join their master in my collection." I worked the controls with practiced precision, using Ju's body to attack his most loyal guards. His hands strangled men who had once obeyed his every command. His teeth tore flesh he had once ordered torn. A grotesque ballet of retribution, as the theater burned around us. I didn't know then that some would escape to spread the legend, that survivors would speak of the blind puppet master who turned the tables on the theater of cruelty. Their nightmares would become cautionary tales, whispered throughout the province. As flames consumed the evidence of my work, I walked calmly through a passage only I knew, Jew shambling behind me on strings of his own sinew. His consciousness remained intact, experiencing every moment of degradation. His body now a prison, more perfect than any dungeon. We emerged into the night, leaving chaos behind. The scholar who valued life had performed his final act of transformation. What moved forward into darkness was something new. Neither fully human nor monster, but an artist who had mastered the medium his enemy had forced upon him. Jew's eyes, the only part of him still under his control, met mine. Though blind, I felt his gaze. The complete understanding of what his future held. It was only beginning. I traveled only by night. Remote mountain paths away from settlements. Jew shuffled behind me, his movements jerky and precise as I manipulated the control mechanisms embedded in his flesh. His consciousness remained intact. His awareness complete. His body no longer his own. We reached an abandoned temple 3 weeks after the theater burned. A place dedicated to forgotten gods. Its walls still strong despite years of neglect. It would serve my purposes. Remote enough for privacy, solid enough for security, sacred enough that locals avoided it, perfect for the next phase of Jew's eternal performance. I established my workshop in the main hall. The altar became my workbench. Religious icons stared down with empty eyes as I refined my masterpiece. Each day I improved the mechanisms controlling Jew. Each night I enhanced his awareness of his imprisonment. Looking back, those first months were my purest artistry. I developed techniques to prevent his body from deteriorating while maximizing his sensory experience. Special compounds preserved his flesh. Mechanical enhancements replaced failing functions. His consciousness remained trapped in a body increasingly divorced from humanity. You created an art form, I told him as I worked, knowing he could hear every word though he could make no response without my permission. I've merely perfected it. His eyes, still his own, tracked my movements with impotent hatred, the only part of himself he still controlled. I made certain to work within his field of vision. His suffering was incomplete if he couldn't witness the process of his transformation. I didn't know then that survivors from the theater had spread stories of the blind puppet master. That frightened whispers traveled through villages faster than we had. That my legend was growing even as I focused solely on my private vengeance. Local villages detected our presence eventually. Strange sounds from the abandoned temple. Glimpses of movement at odd hours. They left offerings at the temple gate. Food, cloth, tools. Not from kindness but fear. They believed appeasing the temple's new spirit would protect them from its wrath. I accepted their gifts. They served my practical needs. In return, I left them in peace, which was more than Jew had ever done. 6 months after our arrival, I ventured into the nearest village disguised as a blind beggar. My scarred face and milky eyes aroused pity rather than suspicion. I listened to their conversations. They spoke of the fall of Warlord Jew's domain, how rival warlords carved up his territory after his mysterious disappearance, how imperial forces established new boundaries. They also spoke of the blind demon who punished the wicked, how survivors of the theater massacre woke screaming in the night, how those most complicit in Jew's atrocities died from mysterious ailments or disappeared entirely. My legend had taken on supernatural dimensions. I remember smiling at their superstitions. The scholar I had been would have corrected their misconceptions. The artist I had become recognized the power of myth. Fear would accomplish what justice could not. Your legacy is transforming, I told Jew upon returning. Not the terror you cultivated, but something more profound, a cautionary tale parents tell children about the cost of cruelty. I permitted him to make a sound then. A long, inhuman moan, that contained all his frustrated rage. The temple walls absorbed his anguish, adding it to centuries of unanswered prayers. A year passed in isolation. My work evolved beyond simple vengeance into genuine innovation. I developed methods to animate dead tissue with greater subtlety, created mechanisms responsive to minimal input. My puppets became increasingly lifelike despite their deceased state. I crafted new companions from bandits who occasionally discovered our sanctuary. Their bodies became raw materials, their skills and knowledge extracted before their transformation. My collection grew, each puppet designed for specific functions. Some for defense, others for maintenance, a few purely for artistic expression. Looking back, isolation changed me further than captivity had. The last remnants of the scholar faded. The vengeful prisoner evolved into something else entirely, a creator of terrible beauty, a master of an art form no one had fully explored before me. We are pioneers, I told my silent audience of puppets as they performed increasingly complex movements. The first true practitioners of this form. Ju remained my masterpiece. I kept his consciousness intact through specialized compounds and careful maintenance. His awareness never dimmed, his suffering never eased. His body performed whatever movements I designed, from basic labor to elaborate dances that mocked his former power. I didn't realize then that part of me still craved an audience, that true artistry demands witnesses, that my greatest work remained incomplete without recognition. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A traveling merchant sought shelter during a storm. I sensed his approach long before he reached the temple gates, considered eliminating him immediately. Instead, curiosity stayed my hand. He was the first voluntary visitor in almost 2 years. "Hello?" he called, stepping cautiously into the main hall where I sat motionless among my puppets, arranged to resemble temple guardians. "I seek shelter from the rain. I bring gifts in exchange for hospitality." I remained silent, evaluating his potential. He was cultured, educated. His clothes marked him as prosperous but not ostentatious. He carried items from distant provinces. Most importantly, he seemed unaware of this temple's reputation. "The temple accepts your request," I finally responded, my voice startling him. "Approach and show your offerings." The merchant bowed respectfully before presenting his gifts. Rare herbs, quality silk, foreign spices, items chosen to please traditional monks rather than a reclusive puppet master. His ignorance confirmed my assessment. I permitted him to stay the night, questioned him about the outside world while keeping my puppets motionless in shadowed corners. He spoke freely, unaware of his audience. Trade routes had stabilized since Ju's fall. Villages once terrorized now flourished. A new governor had been appointed, known for fair judgment and modest living. "Some say the region is fortunate," the merchant commented. The mysterious destruction of Warlord Ju broke the cycle of cruelty. Many believe divine intervention removed him. I allowed myself a small smile in the darkness. Perhaps justice comes in unexpected forms. The merchant departed the next morning with gratitude and an invitation. A nearby town was holding a festival to celebrate 3 years of peace since Ju's disappearance. They welcomed traveling performers. Temple guardians might find appreciation and generous donations. I considered his suggestion long after he left. The scholar would have declined, content with isolated vengeance. The artist saw an opportunity to complete the final act of Ju's punishment. Public humiliation before the very people he once terrorized. "We have been invited to perform," I told Ju, allowing him to make another sound, a whimper that echoed through the temple. "Your final audience awaits." I spent weeks preparing, selected my most impressive puppets, created portable mechanisms, designed a performance that would showcase my technical brilliance while concealing its true nature. Special herbs preserved Ju's appearance, masking the evidence of his transformation. Most importantly, I crafted a mask that would hide his identity until the moment of revelation. His eyes remained visible, windows to his imprisoned consciousness. They would be the only part of him the audience would recognize when the truth was revealed. I didn't know then how completely this decision would transform my existence, that leaving isolation would open possibilities beyond vengeance. That art, even my grotesque version, craves expansion beyond its creator's original intent. The night before our departure, I spoke to Ju at length, something I rarely did directly. "Tomorrow begins your true punishment," I explained while making final adjustments to his mechanisms. "Not private suffering, but public disgrace. Those who once feared you will laugh at your performance. Those who once served you will fail to recognize their master in the dancing puppet. Your legend will be consumed by mine." His eyes, still capable of expression, showed something beyond hatred or fear. Perhaps acceptance, perhaps anticipation of an end, even if that end was ultimate humiliation. The scholar might have felt pity. The artist felt only satisfaction at a composition nearing completion. Morning arrived with clear skies. I packed my puppets and equipment on a cart I had constructed. Ju, fully under my control, pulled it obediently down the mountain path, his movements fluid after years of refinement. No one observing would suspect the cart driver was anything but a loyal servant to the blind puppet master. We headed toward civilization, toward an audience, toward the completion of a vengeance years in the making. The festival exceeded my expectations. Lanterns illuminated streets once darkened by fear under Ju's reign. Children played freely where soldiers had once patrolled. Music replaced screams. Life flourished in the absence of tyranny. I established my stage in the main square, a simple raised platform with black curtains, no elaborate mechanisms needed. My art had evolved beyond dependency on theatrical devices. The puppets themselves contained all necessary components for their performance. We attracted attention immediately. A blind puppet master was novelty enough. The lifelike movements of my creations drew crowds before our first official performance. People marveled at their fluid gestures, their expressive faces, their apparent responsiveness to my subtle commands. "They move as if alive," one observer whispered. If only they knew. I kept Ju hidden, preparing him for the finale. His consciousness remained aware of everything: the sounds of celebration, the commentary about my skill, the reverence my art commanded. His suffering expanded beyond physical sensation into psychological torment. Looking back, I should have anticipated the recognition. 3 years had passed since the theater massacre, but memories of terror run deep. An old man approached as I made final preparations behind my makeshift stage. "Those movements," he muttered, watching my puppets arrange themselves. "I've seen similar techniques during the Warlord's performances." I turned toward his voice, my blind eyes unnerving him. All art builds upon what came before. Perhaps we shared influences. He seemed unsatisfied but retreated. I made mental note to watch for him during the performance. Complications were inevitable. Adaptability was essential. Our first show began at sunset. Simple tales from folklore brought to life through puppetry. I controlled 5 puppets simultaneously, my fingers dancing across control mechanisms hidden within my robes. The audience gasped at complex sequences impossible for traditional puppet masters. I didn't realize then how my art had transcended vengeance. The scholar had sought justice. The prisoner had craved revenge. The artist simply created beauty from horror. Each transition represented evolution beyond Ju's vision when he shattered my life. Word spread rapidly. By our second performance, the crowd had doubled. Officials from the governor's residence attended. Merchants offered patronage. My puppets captivated them all, each performance more ambitious than the last. I revealed nothing about my origins, allowed them to create their own myths about the blind puppet master. Some believed I was a monk who had achieved enlightenment through craft. Others thought me a spirit taking human form. None suspected the truth. For 3 days I built anticipation for the festival's final night, when all performers would present their masterworks. I promised something unprecedented, a performance that would be remembered for generations. The tale of the tyrant's fall, I announced to officials arranging the schedule. A historical piece commemorating liberation from Warlord Ju. They approved enthusiastically. 3 years had transformed recent trauma into safe historical narrative. The region celebrated Ju's disappearance annually, though none knew the true circumstances. My performance would provide satisfying closure while revealing uncomfortable truth. The old man who had recognized my technique spoke to others. I tracked his movements through sound, through vibrations against my stage. He gathered former soldiers who had served under Ju. They attended each performance, their skepticism palpable, their suspicions growing. They would be perfect additions to the audience for the finale. They're beginning to wonder, I told Ju, as I prepared him on the final night. Your former servant sensed something familiar in my work. Tonight they'll understand why. I permitted him to make a sound. A whimper escaped his puppet throat. His eyes, still his own, reflected pure dread. He had witnessed my growing acclaim from his prison of flesh. Tonight would complete his humiliation before those who once bowed to him. The main square filled beyond capacity for the final performances. Acrobats and musicians completed their acts to enthusiastic approval. Anticipation built for the blind puppet master's promised historical piece. The governor himself attended, seated prominently with his advisors. I sensed Ju's former soldiers positioning themselves near the stage. Their hands rested on weapons. Their posture betrayed military training. Their presence added perfect tension to my composition. Looking back, no performance will ever match the exquisite control I exercised that night. 5 puppets emerged to act out the region's suffering under Ju's reign. Their movements conveyed cruelty with precise choreography. The audience fell silent, collective trauma resurfacing through my art. Then came the centerpiece. Ju himself, still masked, portrayed as the tyrant in my historical narrative. His movements were masterful, combining graceful puppetry with subtle hints of his original mannerisms, just recognizable enough to unsettle those who had served him. The performance depicted Ju's atrocities in stylized form. Villages burning, families separated. His infamous theater of cruelty represented through dance rather than explicit violence. The audience watched in respectful silence, captivated by beautiful portrayal of ugly history. His former soldiers grew increasingly agitated. I heard their whispers, their shifts in position. They recognized something in the puppet's movements but couldn't identify what disturbed them so deeply. The climax approached. In my narrative, a mysterious avenger emerged to confront the tyrant. A blind figure representing justice. The audience murmured appreciation at the symbolic representation of their deliverance. Now, I announced, stepping forward, the revelation. I removed Ju's mask with theatrical flourish. His face, carefully, preserved yet unmistakable, caused an audible gasp from the crowd. His eyes, still alive, darted frantically as recognition spread through the audience. Impossible, someone whispered. The Warlord, another confirmed. His former soldiers pushed forward, weapons drawn. What trickery is this? I raised my hand for silence. The crowd obeyed instinctively. No trickery, I responded. Merely justice. Completed. I present Warlord Ju, who once used humans as puppets in his theater of cruelty. Now he serves as my puppet for eternity. To demonstrate, I commanded Ju to perform a degrading dance. His body complied perfectly, while his eyes screamed silent outrage. The crowd watched in horrified fascination. Some backed away, others moved, closer, needing confirmation that their tormentor had truly become a grotesque puppet. I am Master Wei, I continued, once a scholar whose family fell victim to this man's depravity. Blinded and crippled by his order, I transformed my suffering into mastery of the very art form he perverted. Recognition dawned on the officials' faces. The blind puppet master, one whispered. The legend from the theater massacre. Ju's former soldiers hesitated, caught between duty to their missing master and the impossible reality before them. One approached cautiously, studying Ju's face. His eyes, the soldier confirmed. They're alive, aware. I nodded. His consciousness remains intact. He experiences everything, controls nothing. Perfect justice for one who stripped others of autonomy. The governor rose, visibly shaken. This cannot be permitted. Whatever his crimes, this punishment is inhuman. I turned toward his voice. Was his theater of torture humane? Were his living puppets treated with dignity? He created this art form, from cruelty. I merely perfected it and turned it against its creator. The crowd murmured, divided between horror at my methods and satisfaction at Ju's fate. The moral ambiguity was palpable, exactly as I had designed it. Arrest him, the governor ordered his guards. I smiled. Before you decide, witness the completion of my performance. With elaborate gestures, I activated mechanisms within all my puppets simultaneously. Their movements became more fluid, more unnatural. The crowd backed away as they recognized the truth. Not crafted figures, but preserved humans. Former torturers transformed into macabre art. These were his willing executioners, I explained. Each personally responsible for countless atrocities. Each now serving eternal penance through my art. Chaos erupted. Some fled screaming. Others watched transfixed. The soldiers who had served Ju found themselves facing former comrades now, transformed into puppets. The moral certainty of the governor gave way to hesitation. I didn't know then that legends require such public manifestation, that my private vengeance would transform into cultural watershed, that societies need physical embodiment of justice when legal systems fail. I had become that embodiment. You may destroy us, I announced to the conflicted crowd, or you may accept that some crimes demand extraordinary justice. The choice reveals your own complicity or innocence. The governor stepped forward after long consideration. The puppet master and his creations will leave our territory by dawn. What follows them is their own burden. What remains here is our commitment to ensure such atrocities never occur again. I bowed deeply. Victory complete. Ju had lost not only his body but now his legacy. The legend of the blind puppet master would overshadow the tyrant's memory. My vengeance had evolved into something beyond personal satisfaction. It had become a cautionary myth that would endure for generations. We departed as ordered, Ju still performing as my central puppet. His eyes contained something new beyond suffering, perhaps understanding that his true punishment was not physical torment but complete erasure of his carefully constructed image. He had become merely a prop in someone else's story. Perfect justice. We traveled for months after leaving the festival. Word of the blind puppet master spread faster than our physical journey. Villages received us with mixture of fear, respect, and morbid curiosity. Some closed their gates. Others welcomed us cautiously, eager to witness the infamous performance featuring the former tyrant as a puppet. I embraced my new role, no longer merely an instrument of personal vengeance, but a living embodiment of justice. Each performance reinforced the legend while further eroding Ju's former identity. His existence narrowed to these public humiliations. His consciousness trapped in the horror of watching himself become entertainment for those he once terrorized. Looking back, I realized this phase completed my transformation. The scholar died when my family was slaughtered. The vengeful prisoner evolved in darkness. The artist emerged in isolation. Now I became something mythic, a boundary creature between justice and monstrosity, neither fully human nor entirely other. 1 year after the festival revelation, I established a permanent theater in a remote valley town. The local magistrate, a man who had lost family to Ju's atrocities, provided land and resources. The building combined elements of traditional theaters with specialized features I designed for my unique performances. The Theater of Consequence, I named it. The irony was not lost on Ju, whose eyes still reflected his awareness despite years of imprisonment in his puppet form. Word spread throughout the province and beyond. Travelers journeyed specifically to witness my performances. Scholars debated the morality of my methods. Officials vacillated between condemnation and tacit approval. None interfered directly. The memory of Ju's cruelty remained too fresh. The satisfaction of his fate too profound. I continued refining my techniques, developed new preservation methods to maintain Ju's awareness indefinitely, created more sophisticated control mechanisms requiring minimal movement on my part. My blindness, once a disability, became central to my legend. Audiences marveled at how a sightless man created performances of such visual power. I didn't know then that my greatest challenge would come from unexpected quarters. That vengeance, even when achieved completely, leaves emptiness in its wake. That purpose requires constant renewal. The Imperial Court sent investigators in the third year of my theater's operation. Officials, concerned about reports of human puppetry. They arrived unannounced during a performance, observing from the back of the theater as Ju performed his now familiar routine of degradation. Master Wei, their leader addressed me afterward. The Emperor requests clarification regarding your methods. I invited them to inspect my workshop, showed them the mechanisms that maintained Ju's physical form while preserving his consciousness, explained the poetic justice of transforming the torturer into living art. This man massacred my family, I reminded them, blinded me, destroyed my hands, used humans as puppets for his entertainment. I merely perfected his art form and turned it against him. The lead investigator considered my words carefully. The Empire neither condemns nor condones your methods. Justice takes many forms, not all recognized by law. So long as your art remains focused solely on those directly responsible for atrocities, the court will maintain its distance. His carefully worded response contained both warning and permission. I nodded, understanding. My vengeance had limits. Acceptable targets were confined to proven monsters. 5 years after establishing my theater, I faced the emptiness that follows complete revenge. Ju had been utterly destroyed, his body maintained as my puppet, his consciousness reduced to perpetual audience of his own humiliation, his legacy transformed from feared tyrant to cautionary tale. What purpose remained? Looking back, I should have anticipated this void. Vengeance, once achieved, leaves nothing in its wake. The hatred that sustained me through blindness, captivity, and transformation had been fulfilled completely. What remained was merely maintenance of a completed work. The answer emerged unexpectedly. A young man sought me after a performance, his voice filled with desperate hope. Master Wei, he began hesitantly. My sister was taken by Warlord Shen last spring. He maintains a collection of living statues, women paralyzed by specialized poisons, displayed in his garden while fully conscious. Could your methods free her? I considered his request carefully. Extension of my vengeance to other targets had never been my intention. Yet here was suffering similar to what had birthed my art. Here was potential purpose beyond maintaining Ju's eternal punishment. Describe Warlord Shen's security, I requested, his routines, his weaknesses. The legend of the blind puppet master expanded, no longer focused solely on personal vengeance but applying its terrible justice to others who used human bodies as objects. I created new puppets from Shen's guards, freed his collection of living statues, added Shen himself to my performance positioned beside Ju in macabre duet. Others sought my intervention, families of victims, survivors of atrocities. Each request evaluated according to the criteria the Imperial investigator had implied. Only the monstrous, only the proven guilty, only those who had dehumanized others. My theater evolved accordingly. Each performance featured updated casts, as new oppressors joined my collection. The theater of consequence became pilgrimage site for victims seeking closure. Reputation spread beyond the province to neighboring regions, even across borders. I became more than a man, a principle given. Flesh, a consequences incarnate. Through it all, Ju remained my masterpiece, the original, the template against which all subsequent puppets were measured. His consciousness persisted through specialized treatments I developed, ensuring he witnessed every expansion of my influence. His legacy completely subsumed by mine. 10 years after the theater massacre, Imperial authorities formalized my unusual status. An official decree established the theater of consequence as sanctioned instrument of extraordinary justice. Cases, would be referred by provincial courts when traditional punishment seemed insufficient for extreme cruelty. I remember the day the decree arrived. The scholar I had been would have questioned its morality. The vengeful prisoner would have rejected such regulation. The artist I became recognized it as validation of my transformation into living principle. That night, I spoke directly to Ju for the first time in years. His puppet body sat immobile as I addressed his still conscious mind. "You intended to destroy me," I said simply. "Instead, you created something beyond your comprehension. Your theater of cruelty has become sanctioned justice. Your sadism transformed into official retribution. Your memory exists only as component of my legend." I activated the mechanism allowing him to produce sound. A whimper escaped his puppet throat. After a decade, his suffering remained complete, his awareness intact, his understanding of his total defeat absolute. Looking back, I recognize that moment as the true completion of my vengeance. Not merely physical control or public humiliation, but absolute replacement. The warlord who had tried erasing my existence had himself been erased, preserved only as footnote in another's story. The theater of consequence continued its performances for many years afterward. My collection grew selectively. My legend expanded cautiously. My methods refined continuously. Always with Ju as centerpiece, the original canvas on which my art was perfected. Children who visited my theater had never lived under his reign. They knew him only as the famous puppet in Master Wei's performance. His actual atrocities faded from public memory while my interpretation of justice endured. Complete victory. I established a school eventually, selected students with particular sensitivity to suffering, taught them my specialized techniques, ensured the theater of consequence would outlive its founder, created succession that would maintain my puppets, especially Ju, indefinitely. On the 20th anniversary of the theater massacre, I gave my final public performance. Age had weathered me beyond even my own specialized preservation techniques. My students would continue the tradition. The principles would outlive the man. That night, alone with my original masterpiece, I spoke to Ju one final time. "You believed. Power came from inflicting suffering," I told his still conscious form. "I learned that true power lies in transcending it. You remained trapped in the moment of your downfall. I evolved beyond vengeance into principle." I activated his voice mechanism one last time, allowed him to speak after 2 decades of enforced silence. "Kill me," he begged, his voice barely recognizable after years without use. "End this torment." I smiled at his misunderstanding. Death was never your punishment. Witnessing your complete erasure was. Experiencing your legacy consumed by mine. Existing solely as component of another's art. I made final adjustments to his preservation mechanisms, ensured his consciousness would persist beyond my lifetime, added specialized components to maintain his awareness indefinitely. "Your final performance continues without audience," I explained. "The perfect punishment for one who craved spectacle above all else." His eyes, still his own after all these years, contained complete understanding of the exquisite completeness of my revenge. Not merely physical suffering, but existential obliteration. His identity fully absorbed into my creation. His memory preserved only as puppet in my collection. Night fell on the theater of consequence. Tomorrow my students would continue performances without me. The legend would grow beyond its originator. The principle would outlast the man. In the darkness, surrounded by my collection, I touched the crude locket containing my wife's hair and my son's button, the only pieces of them I had recovered. The physical connection to what I had once been, to what Ju had destroyed. "It is finished," I whispered to their memory, feeling something close to peace for the first time in decades. Ju's eyes watched from his puppet form, the final audience to my completed vengeance, the witness to his own perfect erasure. "You wanted to be remembered as a great artist, Ju. I granted your wish.